All right. Welcome in, everybody. Drop your names, guys, in the comments. We are doing name writing. We are doing name writing. We are going to do neon names, everybody. Welcome to my live. Drop your names in the comments. All right, let me just set up the heading. We are doing glowing neon names for you all. Hit that subscribe button, guys. Like the live and get your neon names done, guys. Thank you so much for liking. Who's going to be first, guys? Everybody drop your names, guys, in the comments. First we've got is Aliana. How are you? Aliana. Here you go. Your name's done. All right, who's next, guys? Welcome to my live. Get your glowing neon names done, guys. Everybody get your neon names done. Who's going to be next, you guys? All right, next we've got Mia in the chat. Here you go, Mia. And then we have is Clone. Here you go. Everybody, let's go, guys. Hit the like button, subscribe, and get your names done. We are doing the glowing neon names, guys. Everybody, welcome in. Ajan. Here you go, Ajan. And then who is the next subscriber? Benetta. How are you, Benetta? Here you go. Your name has been done. All right. Who's going to be next, guys? Everybody, welcome in. Hi, Millie. Here you go, Millie. And then we have is Jackson. How are you? All right, Jackson. Here you go. All right, and then the next subscriber that we have is Swara. And then the next subscriber we have is a Reagan. Here you go. Thank you so much for subscribing. And then the next subscriber we've got is Leonie. All right, who's next, guys? Nathan in the chat. Everybody hit that subscribe button, guys. All right, let me just turn on the subscriber mode for you all. Here you go. And then the next subscriber we've got is Sad in the chat. Here you go. And then the next subscriber we've got Natalie. How are you, Natalie? And then the next subscriber we have is Heesing in the chat. And then the next subscriber that we have is Kono. And then the next subscriber we've got is Almina. Here you go, Almina. And then the next subscriber we have is Arthur. Thank you, Arthur. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ave. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Ave. That means a lot to me. Have a great day. And then we have is Colin, right? Here you go, Colin. Have a great day. And next subscriber we have is Harry in the chat. Thank you, Harry. And then the next subscriber is Zoe. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. Thank you. And then the next subscriber we've got is Jax in the chat. How are you, Jax? All right, and the next subscriber we've got is Ruby in the chat. Thank you, Ruby. And then the next subscriber is Arena. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ishani. Here you go, Ishani. And then my next subscriber is Izzy in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Sora. And then my next subscriber is Kira in the chat. Thank you, Kira. And then my next subscriber is Lola. And then my next subscriber is Carled. And then my next subscriber is Antonia. Thank you, Antonia, for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Amanda in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Yamal in the chat. Here you go, Yamal. And then the next subscriber we've got is Yena in the chat. Thank you, Yena. And then my next subscriber is Ola. And then my next subscriber is Jake. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing, Jake. Then we have is Maday. Thank you, Maday. And then my next subscriber is Emma in the chat. Thank you, Emma. And then the next subscriber we've got is Rail in the chat. And then we have is Jay in the chat. And then we have is Mia in the chat. And then we have is Melody in the chat. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Melody. And then my next subscriber we've got is Elena. Thank you, Elena. Have a great day. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Antoine. Thank you, Antoine. Here you go. And then my next subscriber we've got is Jazzy in the chat. Thank you, Jazzy. And then my next subscriber is Maldani. Thank you, Maldani. And then my next subscriber is Emma, who liked and subscribed. Thank you, Emma, for liking too. And then my next subscriber is Dinkan. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Amanda. Thank you so much. I love you too, Amanda. And then my next subscriber is Marco in the chat. Here you go, Marco. And then my next subscriber is Marty in the chat. Here you go, Marte. And then my next subscriber in the chat is EVB. Here you go. And then my next subscriber is, thank you, Marty. I love you too. Messe in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Casey in the chat. Thank you, Casey. And then my next subscriber is Manon in the chat. Thank you, Manon. And then my next subscriber is Jackson. Thank you, Jackson. Have a lovely day. And then my next subscriber is Dion. Here you go. And then my next subscriber is Leo in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Lara in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Pernada in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Dio in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Megan in the chat. Let's get to the next line, everybody. And then my next subscriber is Owen in the chat. How are you, Owen? And then my next subscriber is Zaya in the chat. Thank you, Zaya. And then my next subscriber is Julian. Thank you for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Kalirak. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Harry. Thank you so much, Harry. And then my next subscriber is Kays. Here you go, Kays. And then my next subscriber is Kenzie. Thank you, Kenzie. And then my next subscriber is Shena. Thank you for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Kobe. Thank you, Kobe. And then my next subscriber is, who is that? Yunshay. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Corey. And then my next subscriber is Josh. And then my next subscriber is Cobes. And then my next subscriber is Kashmir. Who's going to be next, everybody? And then we have is Sophia in the chat. Thank you, Sophia. And then my next subscriber is Jida in the chat. Thank you, Jida. And then my next subscriber is Fernazes. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Tojay. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Zoe. And then my next subscriber is Arnes. All right, let's get to the next page, everybody. All right, and then the next subscriber that I have is Tom in the chat. How are you, Tom? Hey, you go, Tom. And then the next subscriber that I have is Leande. How are you, Leande? And then the next subscriber we have is Daniela. Here you go, Daniela. Have a great day. And then the next subscriber we've got is Ronaldo. Here you go, Ronaldo. And then the next subscriber we've got is Mikey in the chat. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Mikey. And then the next subscriber is Ayuf. Thank you. And then the next subscriber is Jamie in the chat. And then the next subscriber we have is Paisley in the chat. Thank you, Paisley. And then my next subscriber is DJ. And then my next subscriber is Raid. Okay, DJ Raid. Here you go. And then my next subscriber is Georgia in the chat. Thank you, Georgia. And then my next subscriber is Lisa. And then my next subscriber is Elsie. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Yuvu. And then my next subscriber is, who is that? Dora, thank you. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Jacqueline. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Mia. Thank you for liking and subscribing to me, Mia. And then we've got is Grace as a new subscriber. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Nay. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Adam. Thank you so much for liking. And then my next subscriber is Aftab. And then my next subscriber is Ava. And then my next subscriber is Regan. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Nia. And then we have is Blake. Thank you, Blake. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Gia, who liked. Thank you, Gia. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Sophia. And then my next subscriber is Olivia. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Alfred. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Ali. And then I have is Batul. Thank you for liking and subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Lucas in the chat. And then my next subscriber is Abe. And then my next subscriber in the chat is JJ. And then my next subscriber is Ara. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Ara. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Nancy. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Michaela. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Lily. And then my next subscriber is Jansa. And then my next subscriber is Libby. And then my next subscriber is Ali. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Alia, thank you. Thank you so much for subscribing and liking. And then we've got Lydon. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Aisha. How are you, Aisha? And then my next subscriber is Mira. That's my name too. Here you go. And then we have is, who is that? Welcome in, Kim Morello. Thank you, Kim Morello. Here you go. Next subscriber we have is Emma Ray. Next subscriber we have is Avery. Thank you, Avery. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Yusuf. Here you go, Yusuf. And then my next subscriber is Anaya. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Jaden. All right, here you go, Jaden. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Chriselle. How are you, Chriselle? And then my next subscriber is John. Thank you for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Adib. Here you go, Adib. And then my next subscriber is Sid in the chat. And then the next subscriber that we've got is Miracle. Thank you. And then the next subscriber we have is Sabina. Thank you so much, Sabina. And then my next subscriber is Elijah. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Hayden in the chat. Thank you, Hayden. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Adrian. Thank you, Adrian, for liking. And then my next subscriber is Sarah. And then my next subscriber is Nowaka. And then my next subscriber is Halina. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing, Halina. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Aria. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Camilla. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Thando. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Amelia. Thank you. Thank you for liking. And then my next subscriber is Rexa. Here you go, Rexa. And then my next subscriber in the chat is Ali. Here you go, Ali. And then my next subscriber in the chat is David. Here you go, David. All right, let's get to the next line, guys. Ella in the chat. Thank you so much for liking, Ella. And then who else liked, guys? I see Molly. Thank you so much for liking. And then we've got Joy who liked. Thank you, Joy. And then my next subscriber is Odie in the chat. Here you go, Odie. Then we have is Wishtay. Thank you so much, Wishtay, for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Naomi. Thank you, Naomi. And then my next subscriber is Bye Bye Ayub. Thank you. Then we've got is Mutasim. Here you go, Mutasim. Thank you so much for liking. And then my next subscriber is Ebony. Thank you, Ebony. And then my next subscriber is, who is that? Welcome in. Everybody drop your names, guys, so that I can write it. If you say me, I want you to know your name, guys. So please, everybody. And then we've got is Ballet. Thank you, Ballet. And then we have is He Sang. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Presley. Here you go, Presley. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. And then we have is Jacob. And then we have is Ava. Thank you so much for subscribing. And then my next subscriber is Musa. Thank you. And then my next subscriber is Navia. Thank you, Navia, for subscribing and liking. And then my next subscriber is Zayden, how are you? Thank you so much for liking. And then we've got is Katerina. Thank you, Katerina, for liking. And then we have is Kai. Thank you, Kai. And then we have is Sman Kaliso. That's a different name. Here you go. Have a great day. And then we have is Rajab. Here you go, Rajab. And then we have is Landry. Alright, guys, now I would go for a break and I'll be back in like half an hour. Take care of yourself. Bye bye. Love you.